Welcome to NFL Fantasy Live. I'm Marcus Grant with Cynthia Freeland, Kimmy Checks, and Adam Rank. We had a wild finish to Week 14. We'll get to that in just a little bit. But in the meantime, everybody take your seats. Don't spill your drinks because it is time for another showing of Overreaction Theater. We talk about what happened on Sunday. And, of course, that is what's going to impact everybody. And that's going to be exactly what we see from a player for the rest of the season. So let's kick it off, Kimmy, with Drew Lock. And Drew Lock could come through as a fantasy playoff waiver wire wonder, correct?
It's the year 2020, so I'm never going to say never to anything, but I don't know if this one's happening. Now, the reason he's getting so much shine right now is because of that almost 26 fantasy point performance against the Panthers in Week 14, also marking his very first game this season without throwing an interception. Now, Lock's been getting into that second-year groove of his with 2+ passing touchdowns in 4 of the last 6 games and has a dope schedule against the Bills, Chargers, and Raiders for the rest of the season, but maybe his recent success shows more promise for next season as opposed for your fantasy playoff run.
Such a tempting streamer, though. Cynthia, Miles Sanders, he is back and he is a league winner.
So he may be a league winner because he does have that nice Dallas matchup in 2 weeks. And he was back because this past game looked incredible. It was all about the read option versus light boxes. Miles Sanders can scoot in those conditions. A lot of people can, but Miles Sanders can most certainly do that. Now, this next matchup against Arizona this week, I don't love the upside so much, but it's got a nice, safe floor. So I'm saying, yes, absolutely, he's going to help you win your fantasy championship.
Coming back just in time for a lot of folks. All right, Adam Rank, who needs Deshaun Watson or Patrick Mahomes? Because the Bears are going to franchise tag Mitch Trubisky.
You know what? That's probably going to happen. The Bears have put themselves into a situation where they've been too good this season to get one of the top quarterbacks coming out in the draft. And, of course, they didn't draft Jalen Hurts in the second round last year, so that means they're going to be looking for a quarterback this season. The one that's probably the best for them is the guy who's been crushing it over the last couple of games. He's had at least 3 touchdown passes in 2 out of his last 3 games, 18 fantasy points, including close to 25 in Week 14. This is a player that I've actually been using in Superflex leagues to great success. And you know what? There's a favorable matchup this week against the Minnesota Vikings. He's got the Jags in Week 16, so there is some momentum building for Mitch. And I think about, though, the running back position. And I think about a guy we talked about earlier this year, back in August, Jonathan Taylor. To me, Marcus, he is the offensive rookie of the year.
Well, you can't see me, but I am staring at the camera, James Robinson Lee. Look, Jonathan Taylor, though, has been fantastic the last couple of weeks. 3 straight games with 90 or more rushing yards. He's had 16 or more touches in all of those games. And he's got a pretty good schedule, especially this week against the Houston Texans, who've given up the second most fantasy points per game to running backs. The start of the year wasn't what we wanted from Jonathan Taylor, but it does look like he's picking things up at exactly the right time. So maybe not the OROY, but pretty good way to finish out the year for him. So, all right. Those were the goods. Those were our dramatic readings of the best performances. Now for some tearjerkers. On the other side, Kimmy, we will start. Tyler Lockett. Oh, where has Tyler Lockett gone? Oh, where can he be?
You see where he's gone. He's ghosted me, and he's ghosted me in the playoffs nonetheless. I've needed you, and I'm going to continue to need you for this playoff push, Tyler Lockett, but I'm probably going to be needing you while you sit on my bench. Both Lockett and DK Metcalf have the 3rd toughest remaining schedule for fantasy wideouts. Not a good sign for Tyler Lockett, who has had fewer than 13 fantasy points in 6 of the last 7 games and only 1 touchdown in that same stretch. We understand what ghosting does to people, right? It hurts your feelings, it messes with your whole flow, and that's what you've done to me when I've needed you the most. So you and me, we're in a little bit of a tough spot, Tyler Lockett.
The circle of trust has been broken with Kimmy and Tyler Lockett. All right, Cynthia, it took a little while, but it looks like Justin Jefferson has hit the rookie wall, and he might end up ghosting you in the playoffs.
When y'all were talking about Jonathan Taylor, I was looking at the camera Justin Jefferson Lee because he's now an adverb just like James Robinson Lee. And I'm telling you, this is not the case. Sure, last week that was not his game, but it's still almost 10 fantasy points. I understand it's not the 17 you're used to from him. And it is a tough matchup against the Bears this next week. However, look where he runs his routes, and Kirk Cousins has something that he wants to prove. In my opinion, I'm still all in on Justin Jefferson. No rookie wall for this guy.
Definitely hoping he bounces back. It's been such a great season for him. All right, Rank. Mike Evans in a Scooby-Doo-like maneuver. You pull off the mask, and it's Scotty Miller.
Yeah, this play right here was a little disappointing because I know a lot of people were celebrating, being like, Miller time. I was not being that way because I have Mike Evans in a bunch of my lineups. But I'm looking forward to this matchup this week against the Atlanta Falcons. Justin Herbert could not throw the ball downfield, and I think a big part of it was because Mike Williams was not in that game for a long stretch. So I think that's not going to be a problem here with Tampa Bay. I think Tom Brady's going to exploit this matchup. He's going to get the ball into the hands of Mike Evans. He's going to go deep. So I think that even though you had fun last week, it is going to be time to turn back to Mike Evans. Now, speaking of wide receivers, someone stole Deontay Johnson's hands, but hopefully they'll be returned this week because this was awful.
Let's hope so, because we know certainly the mail system can get clogged this time of year. I know there's a prevailing thought, especially on football Twitter, that drops don't matter, which I guess is true until they do. And we saw that last week where Deontay Johnson had to sit on the bench for a while after a couple of drops early in the game. The good news is he still leads the team in targets and receiving yards, but Mike Tomlin obviously is fed up with some of these drops. It's always worth starting Johnson because of his ceiling, but right now James Washington is sort of waiting in the wings, and Johnson's just another drop or two from getting back to the bench. So it's become a little bit more risky at this point in the year. All right. If you enjoy random freakouts over single game sample sizes, be sure to check out the NFL Fantasy Football Show streaming on NFL.com, the NFL apps, and at YouTube. You can find it Monday and Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern and Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern. In the meantime, let's turn back the clock to last night's game in Cleveland.
Lamar Jackson fakes the inside handoff, keeps it, weaves to the 2, he's in, touchdown, Lamar Jackson. He'll scramble to the right, he'll tuck and run, 15, 10, 5, touchdown!
This is why this guy is so dangerous. This is why he won the MVP. And he's showing you that he's just going to give you a headache all night long.
Mayfield looks, pulls the ball down, rolls over to the right, he's going to run, he's in, touchdown, Baker Mayfield! The 14-point lead is gone! Lamar Jackson has returned after being in the locker room with cramps. 4th and 5. Jackson rolls to the right, lobs deep. He's got a man open. Hollywood Brown. He's going in. Touchdown, Ravens. Oh, it's unbelievable. Mayfield back to pass. Throws near side. Hunt caught it at the pylon. Touchdown, Kareem Hunt. And the game is tied at 42. Tucker with a chance to win it. Tucker's kick is traveling down the middle. It is good. And the Ravens are on path to make the playoffs with an unbelievable comeback.
It's the Monday Night Recap and primetime performances, starting with a guy who made a lot of stomachs hurt in Cleveland last night. Kimmy?
Well, I'm going to take this one from Kimmy because I want to talk about Lamar Jackson. So sorry, Kimmy, you're just going to have to wait till the next one. Lamar Jackson topped all quarterbacks against the Browns. Oh, just in time for your playoffs, paying off where you drafted him. It's kind of like your golf game. You just have that one shot and it keeps you coming back for more. The interesting thing about Lamar Jackson was that he had the longest rush of his career, 68 yards. Oh, just that many? Okay. And some touchdowns on top of that? Great. I think we're going to see nothing but goodness from here on out. Jacksonville and Giants are next.
Okay, Cynthia, jealous that you get to hype up Lamar Jackson, so let me go ahead and hype up Kareem Hunt. Now, on yesterday's show, I only projected him for 12 fantasy points, but he more than doubled that number, finishing just shy of 30-point mark with 110 scrimmage yards and both a rushing and a receiving touchdown. Now, this was his best fantasy game yet this season, while still playing the second back role behind Nick Chubb and a tough matchup. Now, next up, Kareem Hunt and the Browns face the Giants, who are 24th against fantasy running backs and should be a must-start for that Browns offense that just showed their strength on the ground. Kareem Hunt, what a game.
Yeah, and I think, Kimmy, what the Browns have always had in mind is that those two running backs work better as a tandem. And I know it's frustrating for us fantasy enthusiasts, especially those of us who have Nick Chubb. But how are you going to be upset when your running back gets 24 fantasy points? He scored a pair of touchdowns. He got a couple of receptions. He had 2 targets, 2 receptions. Rushed for 82 yards. I think this is a perfect situation. And I know, again, you want those 4 touchdowns, but I think anybody who went into Monday night's contest with a reasonable expectation for Nick Chubb, well, it got delivered. And I think that the matchup this week against the Giants, it'll be a little bit tougher, but this was a tough matchup as well. So I have a lot of confidence in both of these running backs moving forward.
Well, running backs were the theme of the night in this game, and Gus Edwards was definitely a part of that. You look at what he has done over the course of the year, and you can make the argument that he has probably been Baltimore's most consistent back. And now I feel like his outlook improves because it looks like Mark Ingram is sort of out of the mix there. For Edwards, nearly 65% of his yards have come after contact. He's tied for second among running backs in that mysterious rush yards over expectation per attempt. It's not mysterious. Basically, it means he's doing more than what is expected of him every time he touches the football. The next couple of weeks, he's got the Jaguars, he's got the Giants. So one really good matchup, one sort of meh matchup. But at this point, I do believe Gus Edwards is a nice flex play. By the way, if you missed this game and just wanted to check it out again, you can see this instant classic tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern on NFL Network. Meanwhile, next up in prime time, it's an AFC West clash. The Chargers and Raiders from Las Vegas to kick off Week 15. Thursday Night Football, 7:30 p.m. Eastern on NFL Network, Fox, and streaming on Prime Video. Time now for a bit of sadness. We're going to pour one out for you. Why don't we do My Season Ended When? Because many of us have come to grips with the fact that our fantasy season ended probably before we wanted to. So I know things went sideways somewhere along the way. So we're going to tell you, for us, when things kind of went backwards here. So Rank, please tell us how your season ended in one of your leagues.
Well, you know what? I was pretty fortunate. I only lost one quarterfinal match, and it happened when I played Cam Newton over Drew Lock in a super flex league. Listen, I thought I was pretty proud of myself. I had been playing Mitch Trubisky and felt pretty good about it. And of course, he went out and scored 30 points in the scoring that we used. Cam Newton was not so great. And, you know, had I been of clear mind, I was in the hospital on Thursday. So, like, I shouldn't be held accountable for the choices I was making. But unfortunately, I still would have gone with Cam Newton. Even with a tough matchup against the LA Rams, I still thought that was a better matchup than Drew Lock. Drew Lock! Like, really? You saw 4 touchdowns coming? No, nobody saw that. So unfortunately, congratulations to John, who spent the last couple days on Twitter letting everybody know about it. I'm mentioning him on NFL Network. Perhaps now he can just let it go.
All right, well, I'm glad your season ended in just one game. My season ended when Taysom Hill ruined Alvin Kamara a few weeks back. Now, Taysom Hill's had 4 rushing touchdowns in his 4 starts at quarterback, taking away all the production from Alvin Kamara, giving me a lot of fantasy woes, right? Alvin Kamara was on an MVP-like run, and then all of his numbers dropped drastically. A 13 fantasy point drop in fantasy points per game, and almost 5 target drop in points in targets per game. A difference of 59 receiving yards, and lastly, a difference of 54 scrimmage yards without Drew Brees playing as quarterback. If you added all of those numbers up together, they would add up to my fantasy dreams dying. Thank you so much, Taysom Hill, for nothing.
Well, my season ended when Gio Bernard got benched. I mean, the matchup was great against the Cowboys. Bernard goes 829 consecutive attempts without a fumble. Then on carry number 830, he puts it on the ground. Fumbles one time and stuck on the bench. Barely sees the field the rest of the game. The worst part is that the Bengals ran the ball fairly well against the Cowboys, even though they were trailing for much of that game. It's just frustrating. We're not going to, we'll ignore the fact that the rest of my team also didn't do much of anything. I am laying it right here at the feet of the Bengals offense for benching their number 1 running back in a great matchup just because he made one mistake. We all make mistakes. Come on, give a guy a chance.
Okay, well, my season ended in one of my leagues. Well, I mean, obviously, because I'm trying to compare to Rank, which you crushed me in other things, so it's cool. My season ended with Chris Godwin did nothing, absolutely nothing. 4.5 fantasy points against the Vikings secondary that had been super generous to opposing wide receivers. Chris Godwin, we know he was struggling with that hand issue, but he's tough. He was on the field. He didn't do anything for me, though. So that's great. And by great, I mean not good at all.
Well, you've heard our tales of woe. We allowed you to commiserate with us via social media. Big Beard AK says, my season ended when I sat Miles Sanders week 14, hashtag never sit your studs. I don't know if he's reached must-start status.
Is he a stud?
Jeff, I don't know. Jeff
in
says,
Happy Valley he is.
My season ended, that's true, when Dan Bailey forgot the ball is supposed to be kicked between the goalposts. Bailey missed every kick attempt he had, 3 missed field goals and a missed extra point. If I were a kicker, I would simply kick it through the uprights. That's what I would do. DT says his season ended when he drafted Zeke over Derrick Henry. At least you can pinpoint the exact moment everything went sideways. Max says his ended when he drafted Michael Thomas over Dalvin Cook, 4th overall. Seemed like a great idea at the time. And Derek says his season ended when the Browns costed him a safety at the end of the game, lost by 1 point. That last play was wild, and Rank, that has to be maybe the worst way to lose your fantasy season.
Yeah, I don't mean to be laughing at Derek because I know that this is a pretty frustrating thing. Most of the time when you see plays like this, what you're saying, like if you have Nick Chubb or Kareem Hunt or Jarvis or Big, you don't want to be the guy who's charged with the fumble. That's what you're hoping for right now. You're yelling at the screen, fall down, don't fumble the ball, And then now you're kind of like, they're getting into a dangerous territory where the Ravens could end up getting a like not even getting a safety, but getting a touchdown. Like I know that there are a lot of people who are going up against the Ravens defense right now. That was a little bit frustrating. The safety, sorry, Derek. Yeah, that was bad. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know if you're going to play next year, but sorry.
We're walking through a waiver wire wonderland. So, Cynthia, if this player has not already been added, who do you think is going to make a splash in a lot of fantasy leagues this week?
Well, Jalen Hurts is going to make a splash. Why? Well, the Oklahoma product, and I say that because I've been watching a lot of his college film because there isn't so much of it in the NFL yet, obviously can use the read option. And the read option is a key to fantasy points. Why? Because you get those yards on the ground. You get the potential for a rushing touchdown. You get the opportunity for those passing touchdowns as well. But ultimately, when you look to see the opportunity against Arizona, who's allowed 20-plus fantasy points in 5 of their last 7, read option all the way. You'll thank me for it.
All right, fire me up Cam Akers. Now, even after these last few games where he secured that lead back role for the Rams, Akers is still available in nearly 49% of NFL.com leagues, averaging almost 17.5 fantasy points since week 12. Akers just came off 194 scrimmage yards and 31 touches a game. Now, with both his snaps and fantasy points increases on a week-to-week basis, his upside is there, and he has such a good matchup this week against the Jets and should be started against them as he's seen 13 touches inside the 10-yard line since week 11 and could be spending some time in the end zone for +6.
Well, time is a flat circle, which means we've come right back around to Jeff Wilson Jr. He's had nearly identical snaps and touches to Raheem Mostert over the last couple of weeks. And if Mostert can't play this week, then look for Wilson to get a big boost in that 49er backfield. He gets a great matchup this week against the Dallas Cowboys. Over the last month, running backs are averaging about 147 rush yards and 5 total touchdowns on the ground against this Cowboy defense. So, yes, we may see some Jerick McKinnon or maybe some Tevin Coleman, but Jeff Wilson should get a pretty heavy workload for the Niners.
Yeah, I love all those running backs there. And if those go ahead of you or they're already gone, Lynn Bowden Jr. played really well against the Kansas City Chiefs. He's rostered in 0.0% of NFL.com leagues. Obviously, there's probably only 4 dudes ready. They're still available to pick up waiver wire guys, so you would have a good option of getting him. The one thing that stood out to me was the 9 targets, which he turned into 7 receptions for 82 yards. That obviously season highs and everything. He ran 41 routes against the Chiefs. So again, this is a desperation play. Do not pick him up over any of the players who've already been mentioned. But if you do find yourself in a dire situation, he could be an option for you.
That would be one that folks might have to sweat out if they are putting him in their lineups, which brings us to sweat or no sweat. We're going to profile some of the tougher matchups coming in Week 15 and let you know whether you should be very concerned, if you should sweat, or should just be kind of chill, no sweat about them. So, Rank, we'll start with you and Ezekiel Elliott, and it has been a rough go for Zeke lately. He's facing the Niners, who are giving up the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to running backs over the last 4 weeks. Sweat or no sweat?
Well, I'm going to be sweating this one, and I know all the kids on Twitter are going to blame me for Ezekiel Elliott not going out and crushing the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm sorry, am I on the Cowboys offensive line? Am I the play caller? I don't know, how am I to be blamed for this? I can only tell you that Ezekiel Elliott is an exceptional talent who had an exceptional matchup. Sometimes it doesn't work out. This matchup is not great. And again, I would ask anybody, I would implore you to go and check the NFL.com fantasy rankings before you make any decision. This is not a great matchup with a player who has not put in a lot of great performances. So don't automatically assume that he's going to be a must start every week. But please check the rankings first and move on from there.
And a rough go lately for Ezekiel Elliott. All right, Kimmy, I have to ask you to do this one with your head and not your heart. Clyde Edwards-Helaire against the Saints, who are giving up the third fewest fantasy points per game to running backs over the last month. So sweat or no sweat?
It's a mild sweat. This is me going with my head and not my heart. Now, I have understood that there's been some regression in CEH, and this is going to be a tougher matchup for the rookie running back. However, he's had at least 12 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 games, and the Saints, who are notoriously tough against the run, just allowed both Jalen Hurts and Miles Sanders to 100-plus rushing yards in Week 14, also giving nearly 30 fantasy points to Miles Sanders alone. Now, assuming that the game script is going to favor the passing game more than the run, CEH may not have that massive production, but he's not going to be a full fade for me.
All right, I'm going to go with Chris Carson taking on the Washington football team, giving up the second fewest fantasy points per game to running backs over the last 4 weeks. And for me, I'm going to say no sweat. And yes, Washington has been tough against the run, but they've been kind of average against pass-catching running backs over the last month or so. And Carson, we think of him primarily as a running back, but this year he has added pass-catching to his arsenal. 13 targets over the last 3 weeks. He's turned that into 8 catches for 85 yards and a touchdown. Might not seem like a lot, but a couple of catches here and there certainly changes the outlook of his fantasy production and could make what is just an okay game into a pretty usable fantasy game. All right, Cynthia, how about Aaron Jones against the Panthers on Saturday, who are giving up the fewest fantasy points per game to running backs over the last month? Sweat or no sweat there?
I'm not sweating this even one bit. I know that game against the Lions wasn't exactly what people were expecting, and the Lions were a good matchup. But remember, division rivals, things get a little different. Things get a little dicey, especially when you fire your coach. You don't exactly know what's going to happen the next few weeks. So when you look at the Panthers, sure, they're not going to be not as generous recently. But if you look over the course of the season, they're 5th most generous. So that to me means that they're 6th most generous. I'm sorry. So that means that they're a good matchup for Aaron Jones this weekend.
Oh, well, 6th most, that just changes everything completely now.
Changes everything.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No need for you to sweat this weekend. That matchup is part of a special doubleheader that you can see only on NFL Network. First, it's the Bills and the Broncos, followed by the Panthers and the Packers. This NFL Network doubleheader starts Saturday, 4:30 Eastern, only here on NFL Network. And another note for CMC managers, a day after it was reported that Christian McCaffrey had a chance to return this week, Panthers head coach Matt Rule says he does not think McCaffrey will play in this one against Green Bay. So managers hoping to get him back will have to try to survive the playoffs for one more week with whatever they have used to get them there so far.
Welcome back to NFL Fantasy Live. It is time for my 5. In Week 15, it's a big make it or break it week for most fantasy managers. If you secure a win this week, that means that you're most likely going on to the fantasy championship. So with all that's at stake, I'm here to bring you my 5 guys you cannot trust in Week 15. Let's kick this thing off at number 5 with Terry McLaurin versus Seattle. Now, Terry, he ain't been so scary the last few weeks. Fewer than 5 fantasy points in 2 straight games and has not landed amongst the top 15 wide receiver list in 5 straight contests. Now, the Washington football team has had fewer than 200 passing yards in 4 of the last 5 games. And now McLaurin faces an improved Seahawks defense who have not allowed a touchdown to a wideout since Week 9. Number 4, Chase Claypool at Cincinnati. Now, from being one of Big Ben's hottest weapons to now 4th on the team in terms of targets since Week 11, Chase Claypool may need to be faded for the remainder of the playoffs. His fantasy points have decreased in 4 straight games with fewer than 6 points in back-to-back weeks. With your championship dreams on the line, Chase Claypool may not be worth the risk. Number 3, Ezekiel Elliott versus the 49ers. Now, the first-round draft pick just has not been able to be productive since Dak Prescott went down with a season-ending injury. He's failed to reach double-digit fantasy points in 5 of his last 7 games and has only had 1 touchdown since Week 5. As the offensive woes continue for Dallas, sadly, Zeke will not be eating and won't be getting you fantasy bragging rights this season. Number 2, we're getting closer. It's Tyler Lockett at Washington. Now, I've been counting on him, but the numbers just have not been there. Only 1 touchdown, 1 top 25 wide receiver finish, and fewer than 13 points in 6 of the last 7 games for the guy who earlier this season had 37 and 53-point games. Add that on top of his recent struggles, a tough matchup against the Washington secondary. That's 4th toughest in the league, and you've got yourself a reason to bench Tyler Lockett. All right, Justin, you know the drill. Give me the drum roll because it's time for the number 1 spot. Drum roll! Boom. James Conner at Cincinnati Bengals on Monday. Now, it was just reported today that James Conner is dealing with a quad injury ahead of the matchup against Cincinnati. Now, as a reminder, James Conner missed time due to COVID, and then in his return was outsnapped by Jalen Samuels and scored less than 2 fantasy points against the Bills. The lingering injury and the reduced usage in Week 14 should be enough concern for you to look elsewhere for a trustworthy playoff running back. All right, those are my 5 players you cannot trust this week.
All right, projectors, everybody get ready. It's time for another edition of Higher or Lower. I will hear with Cynthia, give her a player that's going in week 15. She will tell me whether the projection I give her is higher or lower, or something to that effect. You know how I do. We've been doing this for months now. Anyway, let's start off with Aaron Rodgers against the Carolina Panthers. Rodgers has been great all season long, averaging 3 touchdown passes a game this season. Carolina has allowed 3 or more in 4 of the last 5 games, so let's set the number at 3. Higher or lower than 3 passing touchdowns?
We're going to go with lower in this one, but still 287 passing yards and 11 rush yards and 2 touchdowns, which is almost 21 fantasy points. You're going to be just fine, people. The reason for this is more about using a different look on offense. We've seen peppering in a little bit different things in the past 3 weeks, and I think they'll continue that because I know Aaron Rodgers is going to want to keep that home field bye. So what you want to do in this one, you want to make it nice and easy, a little more on the run game, a little more control. Don't make it be that Aaron Rodgers use your huge arm late in the game.
That would be 9 straight games with 20 or more points for Rodgers if he does pull that off this week. Next up is Jalen Hurts, fresh off 106 rushing yards. He goes to Arizona, where the Cardinals are allowing the 4th most rushing yards to quarterbacks this season, so higher or lower than 70 yards on the ground.
Woo, higher. It's almost never that I get a quarterback projected to run for 73 yards. That's ridiculous. 197 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, an interception to go along with it. Part of the reason why Arizona's been generous to opposing mobile quarterbacks is because they don't always have all of their linemen, like the defensive linemen, with their hands on the ground, right? They can pull back and they play a little bit more of a zone. So that means Jalen Hurts is a better opportunity to get those yards on the ground for you.
Hurts was the leading quarterback rusher last week until, Lamar Jackson went Lamar Jackson on everybody. How about Cam Akers? He's seen his scrimmage yards increase in 3 straight games, and now he gets the Jets, who've allowed more than 136 scrimmage yards per game. So higher or lower than 100 scrimmage yards per game for Cam Akers?
Okay, so we're going to go lower than this one. I have 71 rush yards, 7 receiving yards, 1 reception, and a touchdown. A nice, solid game for him. Why do you not see a lot of rush yards against the Jets? Because the teams throw against the Jets quite a bit. So I'm really targeting pass catchers in this one and a little bit less on the ground. They're going to use their passing game. There's passing options. Short passes are how you really beat and then solidify your beating of the Jets, if that makes sense.
I follow you. I do. All right. Let's stay with scrimmage yards for rookie Jonathan Taylor. He's had over 110 in 3 straight games, faces the Texans, who give up the most. So higher or lower than 115 scrimmage yards for JT?
Let's go higher. 94 rush yards, 3 receptions for 27 yards, and a touchdown. It's going to be a big one for Jonathan Taylor. Part of the reason why you see the Texans get gashed on the ground is because once people get into that second level, see ya later, it's not going to end well for the Texans. And I think with that O-line, yikes, it's going to be a good one for Jonathan Taylor.
I will move on to the red-hot Tyreek Hill. He's had 16 touchdowns on the year and 2 or more in 4 of his last 6 games. But now he faces the Saints, who've only allowed 2 receivers to have a 2-touchdown game this season. Those are Mike Williams and DJ Moore. So higher or lower than 2 touchdowns for the Cheetah? We're
going to go with lower on this one. Just the one touchdown, okay? Be happy with it. 6 receptions, 91 yards. There's that touchdown, 21.1 fantasy points. Why? Because actually, when you look at number 1 wide receivers and Marshawn Lattimore's efficiency against them, it is really tough to play against Marshawn Lattimore. Now, I'm not saying Tyreek Hill won't have a really good game, but 2 touchdowns, Lattimore is not going to let that happen.
2 touchdowns, just being greedy, people. Look, just be happy with how great he's been all year long. Next up, we've got the rookie Brandon Ayuk, who has a touchdown in 3 of his last 4 games. Now he faces the Dallas Cowboys, who have allowed 22 receiving touchdowns to wideouts. That is the most this season. So higher or lower than a touchdown for Ayuk?
Starman Seth, give me the star.
Woo! All right.
There it is. That means I have 1 touchdown projector for Ayuk. A star when he plays against the people with a star. I think it's so fitting right here. 6 receptions, 64 yards. There's that touchdown. It's going to be a fun one to watch because I think when you see his development from last year at ASU to now, you're going to see how he's like really turned into an NFL wide receiver. So I'm excited to watch him on this weekend.
I think if Brandon Ayuk had been healthy for most of the year, we would be talking about him sort of along the lines we talk about Justin Jefferson and some of these other rookie receivers who have had really big seasons. All right, thank you, Cynthia. Time for playing for keeps. Any fantasy managers out there we know take part in keeper leagues. So we're going to go around the horn and figure out which guys you are willing to keep in exchange for an appropriate draft pick in the 2021 season. So, Rank, who are you playing for keeps with this year?
Well, I really like DK Metcalf, and I think as we start looking at drafts next season, he might be one of the first or second wide receivers off the board. You can make a very good case for him. I was able to select him in the 4th round, and if I'm giving up a 4th round selection for DK Metcalf, I'm taking that all day. My only hope is that the Seahawks defense gets worse during the offseason so we could continue to have Russell Wilson back there cooking and having to throw the football like this. But I think even if they do kind of stabilize a little bit, DK Metcalf is definitely worth a 4th round selection.
Okay, Rank, I know you like DK Metcalf, but I know you like my pick as well. It's James Robinson. We've talked about this so much. Now, he went undrafted, so he could be kept for a late one in a keeper league next year. Lucky me for picking him up off the waiver wire. But anyway, this guy could be Rookie of the Year, averaging over 18 fantasy points per game this season, 10-plus fantasy points in all 13 games played, the only running back in the NFL with that stat line. 16-plus touches in all 13 games. Only him and Derrick Henry share that stat. 224 carries this season. The rest of the Jacksonville Jaguars running backs only had 9. James Robinson, he's the real deal.
Someone else who's the real deal and a rookie? Justin Jefferson. This has turned into the We Love Justin Jefferson show. His 11th round ADP, yeah, I'm going to exceed that by a ton. He's my very, very way too early projected top 5 at the position, something like that. This is a guy who's already seen, 24% of the target share, 100-plus receiving yards in 5 games this season. This is going to be one in the future. This is going to be, we're looking at a guy who's going to be top 2 rounds, like going forward, like just from here on out.
Justin Jefferson's been great. Part of the reason he got that opportunity is because Stephon Diggs was no longer in Minnesota. He's gone to Buffalo and been fantastic. Right now, he's your wide receiver 3 in fantasy, leads the league in receptions, 12 games with 6 or more catches, 3rd in receiving yards. I got him in the 7th round in a couple of drafts. And right now, I think we're going to be talking about him as an early 2nd round pick with what he has done in that Buffalo offense. I will gladly make that trade-off to get a guy who has been as productive as Stephon Diggs has this year. All right, so that is a look into the future. It's time to live in the now, though, with our Week 15 flex picks. Allow us to ease your mind with some of your favorite starts this week. Kimmy, start us off.
All right, let me kick this off with Jarvis Landry. You saw him balling out last night in what I think was the game of the 2020 season. His game already over. 11-plus fantasy points in 8 goals this week against Giants that are of near 20 points to DeAndre Hopkins. Jarvis Landry is on a hot run, and I think you could take the risk by putting him in the flex.
All right, well, someone I like to put in my flex, this one's for you, Marcus. Robert Woods. I know you love him so much. I told you, I like people who catch passes that are thrown their way. And the Jets, this is a great situation for him. This week, he's going to be a huge upside flex play. I'm playing him in all of my standard leagues. This is for the everything, the big cheese in there, and in tons of daily lineups as well.
Fight on forever, Bobby Trees. I'm going to go with Nyheim Hines and flex him as much as I can in different spots. The Indianapolis running back situation seems to have become more of a two-headed attack lately, and really apart from a couple of maybe spike weeks, Hines has had a pretty consistent snap share. He's second on the team in targets, and now he gets to face the Texans, who've given up the fourth most receiving yards to running backs. So even though Jonathan Taylor looks to have taken control in that backfield, I still think there's room for Nyheim Hines to be productive.
One of the players I'm going to be looking at this week is Raheem Mostert. Obviously, this is going to be a situation we're going to monitor the injury report. He did leave for a little bit on Sunday. So again, we talked about Jeff Wilson earlier. Both of these players are great plays against the Cowboys, who've allowed the most yards per game this season to running backs, and they've allowed a top 20 fantasy running back in 3 of their last 4 games.
You probably saw that amazing one-handed touchdown catch on the flea flicker to A.J. Brown, but what about some of those hard-earned points that didn't end in the end zone? We got some amazing fantasy points that might have helped you survive and advance in Week 14.
Throw to Russell Gage, who's doing it all for the Falcons today. Breaks into the clear.
My goodness.
He is just playing with the most confidence he has in his young career yet.
Barnett came, they get it to Smith, breaks a tackle, and then eludes Cox. What a play by Traquan Smith.
Get down around those legs, take away the engine.
Toss, Zay Jones, open man, Nelson Aguilar. A little razzle-dazzle for the Raiders.
Just a beautiful play.
A little creativity, a little trickeration right there.
Handoff Cook. Another big hole to run through. Still going. Dalvin Cook. It's just a lot of missed tackles.
Carr looking for it all. Oh, it's snared for the interception by Kenny Moore.
There's a toss. Intercepted again. Howard has one. And a one-handed INT. Are you kidding me? Kenny Moore.
One-handed, the X-Man got another one.
It's time to celebrate some amazing fantasy players like the ones we just saw who helped us get some wind over the weekend. We, as we always do on Tuesday, raise a glass to fantasy class. So Adam Rank, who are you cheersing this week?
Well, this one goes out to my boy Mitch Hine, who had the wherewithal to drop Mike Davis 2 weeks ago because you thought CMC was going to be back. And guess who had the #1 waiver priority that I'd been holding on to for 6 weeks, waiting for such an occasion just to go out there and pounce on one of the top running backs who would be available. I didn't realize it was going to be this guy. And now I'm starting him this week. And so, Mitch, thank you so much. When I beat you in the playoffs this week with Mike Davis, I hope you're not going to be too mad about it.
Hoist on his own petard. Gotta hate that. Kimmy, who are you toasting this week?
Marcus, I'm toasting to a guy who you like to call Mr. December. It's the fantasy playoff GOAT, Mr. Derrick Henry. This guy just knows how to perform during the fantasy playoffs, averaging 27 fantasy points a game in the fantasy playoffs since 2018. He just had nearly 37 points in week 14. His third game with 150 plus rushing yards and 2+ rushing touchdowns versus Jacksonville. Such a good remaining schedule against the Lions and the Packers. Derrick Henry, thank you for winning a lot of people fantasy championships. Cheers.
December, a good month for tractor pulls, apparently. Cynthia, you are up. Who are you toasting to?
Well, I am toasting Kimmy's favorite, Travis Kelce, Kimmy's favorite team at least. And
Woo-hoo!
Travis Kelce, I thought I may have overdrafted you, but I didn't. And you got me not only a playoff win, but the entire season, you totally lived up to my 4th round. Yep, I'm going to admit it. My 4th round, I thought I was getting a deal, but whatever. This to me is really helpful because 8+ receptions in 6 straight games. That's the longest streak by a tight end since at least 1950, since I started playing fantasy football in 1950. Travis Kelce, thank you.
If you can get Travis Kelce in the 4th round next year, then you just won the league automatically. That's just how that works. I would like to toast Sean McVay and Frank Reich for giving us some backfield clarity, because really, that's all we want. We just want to know who we can roll with in your respective backfields. The Rams and the Colts right now looking more and more like 2-man backfield. They're leaning more heavily on the rookie running backs, Cam Akers in Los Angeles, Jonathan Taylor in Indianapolis. And you know what? While we would love a workhorse, just single backfield, you know what, 2, that's manageable for us. So I just want to thank both these head coaches for helping out our fantasy team. And I'd like to say, may our rosters always have enough room for all of the running backs that we have on our rosters each and every week. Because, this is what we love. See? So cheers. Cheers to all of them. We certainly appreciate that. All right, time for Riddle Me This before we hit the break. Lamar Jackson passed Aaron Rodgers on Monday night to become the QB1 this week for the first time this season. How many times has Rodgers been the QB1 in 2020? You got 3.5 minutes to figure this one out. You can phone a friend, but the honor system, no Googling. We're back with the answer after this. Time to answer our Riddle Me This question. Before the break, we asked, Lamar Jackson passed Aaron Rodgers on Monday night to become the QB1 this week for the first time this season. How many times has Rodgers been the QB1 in 2020? We all gave our guesses during the break. We were all told that we were wrong. So now I want to see what the right answer is. 0. Wow.
Oh.
So it's been close. So he's been consistently like 2 or 3, just never enough to take the top spot in any given week.
I should have known.